Hi there, this is Lynda from Hoop Sisters, and I am so excited about our mystery quilt for 2017. Normally, we don't share the name of the quilt until the very end, but we've decided to break our own rules and share the name of our quilt this year. We've named it Wild Goose Chase, and this is the block for week 1. This is called Around We Go Geese, and it's time to get started. I'll show you how to make this fun block. So here's a finished look at our block, and as you can see, we use just a basic white background, and then we use some assorted colors of a monoline called grunge. You can use whatever you want, maybe a dark background. You can use some prints in here, make it scrappy, but it's a mystery quilt, so you're not sure exactly what it's going to do, but we've kind of used a rainbow effect, which are described in our instructions. So to get started with our Around the Go Geese block from week 1, you'll need some battleizer, of course. I've got mine in my hoop already. You'll need your backing. If you're using wool, the optional wool, and I've already sealed the edges with my iron. You'll need fabric 1, and fabric 1 for this particular block, you take a square and cut it in half diagonally to make 2 triangles. You'll have some strips, and then you'll need small squares of fabric 2, fabric 3, 5, 6, and 7. So that's what this is. You'll need your quilting thread and a bobbin. You'll need water-soluble thread. You'll also need a bobbin of regular embroidery thread. And it's always very handy to have a pair of hoop scissors minis. So let's get started with this block. So I have water-soluble thread in my needle. I have embroidery bobbin thread in my bobbin. I've hooped up my battleizer, and I'm going to stitch step 1. So now I have a nice square where my wool is going to go, and I will place my optional wool right inside the square and stitch step 2, which is tacking down the wool. So step 3 is the placement stitches for all of your piecing for your block. So if you skip the wool step, which is step number 2, you can go on and stitch step 3 on top of your battleizer. Because my wool's a little fluffy, I just want to make sure my foot doesn't get caught. So just try to stay ahead of it. So now we're ready for step number 4. So step number 4, we're going to place fabric 2 right in this little triangle here at the bottom. We're going to keep with our water-soluble thread in the needle. And I'd like about a 1/2 inch hanging down from the bottom, roughly. Make sure I'm covering the area, and we'll let it stitch our tack down. I do have my thread cutter on at this point, and I'll leave it on until we put the back on. So now that we have that stitched, we're going to go ahead and trim it. So there we have step number 4, and we're ready for step number 5. Step number 5, I've gone ahead and changed my needle thread to a neutral thread. I'm just using my white quilting thread for all the stitching throughout. And we'll take our fabric 1 and we'll place it right side to the last triangle with our raw edges even, making sure when you flip it, it will totally cover the next area, which is right here. So if you want to give it a little test, if I put it about like this, it should work beautifully. So right sides together, and because I have a color under the white, I want to make sure that my white totally covers the color so I don't get it peeking through. And we'll let it stitch the seam. Cut that thread, and the next step Number 6 is to flip this right side up, smooth it out. And when I smooth it out, I want to make sure I'm getting a nice seam here. So do some finger pressing. So I'm not tugging it, but I am gently making sure that it's nice. I got a nice seam there. The reason for that is if you get any kind of extra fabric in there, when you go to do your quilting step, you want your quilting to land inside the goose. So that's why I was very careful pulling that out. So now I'm going to trim this up and come back and do the next step. So I'm ready for step 7 and 8. Step 7 is to put your fabric number 1 on the other side of your goose. And again, I'm just going to make sure I have enough. So when I turn it, I'm totally covered, which I am. So I will put my fabric just like this. Right sides together, making sure I'm covering all the green underneath. And I'll stitch the seam. And then step 8 is to flip it right side up, again smoothing it out. Make sure we have a nice crease right here because our quilting is going to land just inside, so we want to make sure we don't have any excess fabric that would kind of do one of these things. So just pull it nice and tight. So we'll trim this and come back for step number 9. So we're ready for step 9 and 10, and that's to place the next goose. And for step 9, it's fabric 3, which is my yellow. So I will put it right sides together to the trim seam. By the way, I trimmed the seam to a scant 1/4 inch inside the block, and I left about a 1/2 inch outside the block. So right sides together. I'm still keeping with my neutral thread. Let it stitch the seam. And then for step 10, we flip this goose right side up. Again, making sure we have a nice finger press seam right there. And let it tack down that goose. So I'll trim this and come back and do the next 2 steps. Steps 11 and 12 are a seam for fabric 1 on this side of your goose. So we'll put your fabrics again right sides together, making sure to cover the fabric underneath so it doesn't show through. Stitch the seam. And then we'll turn the fabric 1 right side out, again making very sure that you smooth it. Get a nice crease here in your seam area. And we'll stitch the tack down. So I will again trim this up and we'll come back and do it. So I've trimmed my fabric 1, and because this piece is on the inside of my block, I've done like a scant 1/4 inch around the whole thing. Only the pieces that are on the outside of the block do you do your 1/2 inch. So we're ready for step 13 and 14. And again, we'll place fabric 1 right side to the goose. Let it sew the seam. And then we'll flip our fabric right side up. And once again, making sure we have a nice crease here so our quilting lands where it needs to. And let it sew the tack down. So we'll get this trimmed up And we'll continue on with our block with our goose fabric, and then our fabric one on the right side and our fabric one on the left side, and continue all the way up the block. So I've completed my Around We Go geese on this side of the block. So now we're to step 31, which is where I place my triangle of fabric 1, right side to all the geese with my raw edges even. And I go ahead and stitch the seam. And now we're ready to place the back, but first I just want to check this and be sure we're covering, and we are. And I have a little bit of blue sticking out here that I'm going to trim because I don't want that to show up later. So I'll just cut that out. And so now the next step is to place the back. So we'll turn the hoop over and take our backing fabric and place it over the stitching, making sure it's centered. You can use spray adhesive, temporary spray adhesive if you'd like. I hoop my battleizer with the rough side down so it tends to grab it very nicely. We turn it back over, put it under the machine, and now we're going to change to our water-soluble thread in the needle, and the machine will baste around the entire block, so your job is to keep your fabric out of the way and nice and smooth. And I've got my water-soluble thread in my needle. I'm slowing my machine down as slow as it will embroider. And I'm just going to make sure that these pieces of fabric 1 stay out of the way and they stay nice and smooth, because we want to make sure our quilting aligns nicely. So when I get to this corner, I'm going to stop the machine, And just make sure I have a good crease on this last seam that I put in. If I need to get close to the needle, this little stylist or a stiletto or something like that is good to have. So while it's basting around the block, it's also doing the back. And this side I want to make sure I have it smoothed out. Again, so my quilting lines up nice. So there we go. We have our block, top of our block totally finished and pieced. And we have our back on. So now we're ready to do the quilting. Before I do the quilting, just from experience, I always check under the block and make sure I have a nice smooth back, and I do. Make sure nothing moved on me. So now to do the quilting, we're going to place your quilting thread A in the bobbin and also in the needle, and we'll be back to do our last step. So I'm ready to do the quilting. I have my quilting thread A and my needle in the bobbin. I'm going to go into my machine and turn off my automatic thread cutter. But first I have to hit the right button. There we go. It's off. And the first thing I like to do is bring my bobbin thread up to the top. Just hold on to that thread. That way, by turning off our cutter, we'll have a nice clean back, and we also won't have little knots where we begin and end. So we'll go ahead and do our quilting. If possible, I forgot to do it, I'm going to do it right now. You can raise your foot a little bit to accommodate the wool. So I just raised it right now. I should have actually probably done it earlier, so it doesn't push on the wool and drag. So the machine is going to quilt in the ditch around the geese, and that's why we had to pay real close attention to how we did our finger pressing on here so we get a nice even quilting. So my block is done, so let's take a look and see how we did. So hopefully you can see the quilting. It's right in the ditch around all the geese. And so for this mystery quilt, you'll need to make 3 more of these, 4 in total, and get them stitched together. and we'll be back next week to show you week 2.